The final place to focus our survey of theater history is on the present and the ways in which theater has adapted all of the eras that have come before into its offerings today, while also innovating in spaces that never would have occurred to the practitioners of the past. Perhaps the most intriguing avenue that theater offers its audiences is in exploring the identities of those whose experiences differ from the mainstream. Whether one believes that theater should be democratizing in its scope or purely for entertainment's sake, it is difficult for audiences to not experience sympathy for the characters on stage in well written plays. And if those characters embody the panoply of human experiences, then the development of empathy for others becomes a natural extension of the experience of theater. Therefore, the theater of today has much to do with identity. Theater has long welcomed those who might otherwise have felt that they were outcasts of society, as we have seen evidenced in periods like the Middle Ages. Yet the lived stories of those people have only in recent decades been made the subject of the dramatic work seen on stage. The complex historical relationship of America to the various ethnicities who inhabit it is reflected in its theater. Yet this experience is not unique, as many countries around the globe have experienced colonization and oppression of minorities. All of these topics find voice on the stage. Increasingly, the acknowledgement that our world has long been designed for the able-bodied has led to modifications of the spaces that we inhabit, so that those of all abilities can take part in society. The theater is no different in finding ways to expand for whom and by whom it is produced. As an embrace and celebration of humanity, theater does not need to, nor has it been content to pigeonhole itself, and the various identities that make up the world can and will continue to be reflected there. Just as our dramatic literature examples from the course have shown glimpses into the reactions of playwrights to politics, ideologies, religion, and the like throughout the centuries, we can reasonably assume current and future playwrights will do the same. For example, the next Pulitzer Prize winning play might focus on war in Ukraine, Ethiopia, Sudan, or Yemen, as ripped from today's headlines. Or perhaps that work might deal with the ways in which the rights of women have ebbed and flowed over the last century. Still another option for dramatization might be about the experiences of transgender people throughout history. When it comes to the stage, there is not a topic that theater artists have eschewed or will avoid. Theater innovations can train audiences to expect the unexpected when they walk into the auditorium. Cycle plays seek to engage audiences over multiple sittings or even across several nights' performances. Our play from this module, Tony Kushner's Angels in America, is one such work that has been divided into two plays, Millennium Approaches and Perestroika. Another, The Kentucky Cycle by Robert Schenken, is a two-part, 6-hour epic featuring a series of 9 one-act plays. Both have won Pulitzer Prizes for drama. Another Pulitzer Prize winner is the playwright August Wilson, who wrote a cycle of 10 plays, each set in a different decade of the 20th century, chronicling the experiences of African Americans throughout that period. Though each play is usually performed on its own, the entire project has made Wilson one of the enduring voices of the American stage. The expectation that audiences endure such lengthy stories may seem new in the context of what audiences have come to expect in the theater, but consider where tragedy originated. The ancient Greeks were accustomed to witnessing 3 plays the length of Oedipus the King, along with a shorter satyr play, all within a day during the festival Dionysus. And then they repeated it twice more for the other playwrights' works that were part of the competition. A similar phenomenon has also arisen for the screen, wherein movies have greatly expanded the time from an average of 90 to 100 minutes to regularly upwards of 2 hours now, and many of the limited run series on streaming networks are, in and of themselves, one lengthy story broken into multiple parts, but each enticing viewers to binge them in as few sittings as possible. All of this expansion of the time it takes to tell a story has even led theater creators to move beyond traditional dramatic narrative forms to explore other ways of telling stories. Gats is a unique production in which the characters enact the novel The Great Gatsby within the confines of their office, blurring the lines between our expectations of theater and that of listening to a novel being read. The play takes place for more than 6 hours, with two intermissions at 15 minutes apiece, and one dinner break of an hour and a half. Here we will hear from some of the creators, as well as a New York Times critic.
By the time Gats is done, you're going to believe that The Great Gatsby is the greatest novel ever written.
We came up with the idea that Scott and James would be these two guys working in an office, and that Scott would be obsessively reading The Great Gatsby.
I'm an employee in a shabby little office, and come into work one morning. I can't get my computer started, so I don't have anything to do. I find a copy of The Great Gatsby in the clutter on my desk. I start reading it out loud, and I can't stop.
We chose very deliberately not to make it into a play. We wanted to leave this as a novel, but do it on stage.
Not based on The Great Gatsby. It is The Great Gatsby from cover to cover.
And just when you're in danger of being a little too immersed in a staged adaptation of The Great Gatsby story, boom, the office comes back, the lights change, and suddenly somebody's giving somebody a piece of paper or some kind of work assignment.
Gats is being presented over two different performances, usually with a dinner break in between, because every word of The Great Gatsby is presented on stage as part of Gats.
We actually didn't think there was anything you could cut from this book, that somehow this book was already perfectly written in a way, and we couldn't make it better. We couldn't even make it better for the stage by trimming it down to just dialogue.
This work has been hailed from coast to coast and around the world as one of the most exciting new works to come out of New York in the last decade.
This show has gotten a better response than anything we've ever done.
This is Ben Brantley, chief theater critic of the New York Times. For me, 2010 will be most fondly remembered as the year Gats finally made it to New York City. This extraordinary production from the Elevator Repair Service is a word-for-word presentation of F. Scott Fitzgerald's immortal novel of the Jazz Age, The Great Gatsby. Now, Gats had been circling Manhattan for years, but unable to land because of permission problems with the Fitzgerald estate. So even before it got here, it had acquired this aura of legend befitting the portrait of a mythic man. The miracle is that when it opened at the Public Theater this fall, Gats did not disappoint. The theater surfeited these days with plays adapted from other mediums, books, movies, TV shows. But as directed by John Collins, Gats became something singular, a hymn to the act of reading itself, of being seduced into another world by gorgeous sets of sentences. Set in a shabby office, Gats began with the discovery of a copy of Gatsby by Scott Shepard, the actor who began reading in a flat voice that little by little took on a fascinated animation. And lo and behold, his bored-looking fellow office workers seemed to be transformed into Fitzgerald's cast of characters, with almost subliminal changes in lighting and sound effects. You were caught up in the whirlwind of these destructive lives that Fitzgerald depicted so vividly. We were all living vicariously through Mr. Shepard's perfectly modulated, perfectly human common reader. Suddenly, before you knew it, more than 6 hours had passed, and you had that drugged, transfixed feeling from waking up from a really great read. I'm Ben Brantley of the New York Times.
Another innovation of the late 20th and the early 21st centuries is verbatim theater. Such productions employing this technique include those by monologuist Anna Devere Smith, as well as the more dubious playwright/performer Mike Daisey. The latter produced an infamous monologue entitled The Agony and the Ecstasy of Steve Jobs, in which he recounts a trip to China where he allegedly gained access to one of the factories supplying the American company Apple Incorporated.
In his one-man show, The Agony and the Ecstasy of Steve Jobs, Mike Daisey is showing audiences the darker side of technology. We're at the Public Theater to see what it's all about.
In my first 2 hours of my first day at that gate, I met workers who were 14 years old. I met workers who were 13 years old. I met workers who were 12. Do you really think Apple doesn't know?
Give us a quick rundown, if you could. What is The Agony and the Ecstasy of Steve Jobs all about?
Well, it's about two things primarily. It's about these beautiful objects that we have in our pockets and that we carry around with us and that we use every day, and about how they became such a huge part of our lives and the man who really brought them into our lives. And then it's also about the circumstances under which they are made. And Mike goes actually to China to investigate the factories and the lives of the workers who create these products.
What was the spark for this show? What first struck your imagination and made you want to create this piece?
I saw these pictures that had been taken by an iPhone in a factory that had managed to make it out to the public, pictures taken from the inside of the factory. And seeing those pictures caused me to start thinking about the fact that I didn't know where my devices came from really. And I realized I need to go to China to actually see firsthand how they're made.
The performance of this piece caught the attention of the producers of the popular radio program and podcast This American Life. Believing in Daisey's first-hand account, they treated this as journalism. When other journalists questioned the authenticity of the account, however, This American Life was forced to retract the earlier episode.
From WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life, distributed by Public Radio International. I'm Ira Glass. And I'm coming to you today to say something that I've never had to say on our program. 2 months ago, we broadcast a story that we've come to believe is not true. It's a story that got a lot of attention. More people downloaded it than any episode we have ever done. This is Mike Daisey's story about visiting a plant in China where Apple manufactures iPhones and iPads and other products. He's been performing this story on stage as a monologue since 2010. We didn't commission this story. We didn't send him to China. We excerpted the stage show that he's been telling in theaters around the country. We did fact-check the story before we put it on the radio. But in fact-checking, our main concern was whether the things that Mike says about Apple and about its supplier Foxconn, which makes this stuff, were true. That stuff is true. It's been corroborated by independent investigations by other journalists and studies by advocacy groups, and much of it has been corroborated by Apple itself in its own audit reports. But what's not true is what Mike said about his own trip to China. As best as we can tell, Mike's monologue, in reality, is a mix of things that actually happened when he visited China and things that he had just heard about or researched, which he then pretends that he witnessed firsthand. He pretends that he just stumbled upon an array of workers who typify all kinds of harsh things that somebody might face in a factory that makes iPhones and iPads. And the most powerful and memorable moments in the story all seem to be fabricated.
Ira Glass, the show's host, confronted Daisey on the program, leading to a very tense, albeit ironically dramatic, confrontation. Is it possible to imagine a limit to what theater will respond? And how should these new responses be formatted? Along with the various people and places that Cohen discusses at length in Chapter 10, one last consideration about the theater companies of today is how they reach the people who are necessary for them to continue to exist. Building on the ease and availability of recording equipment and editing software, we now see theater companies of all sizes taking advantage of media as a means of promoting themselves and finding new audiences. Here are just a few examples.
Plague sears my people everywhere. Army, citizens, no one escapes. Great feeds grows nothing. Seeds rot in the ground. Our women, when they labor, cry, Apollo, Apollo. But their children die, and lives, one after another, split the air.
Tonight I speak of 6 teenagers whose tales ended abruptly on a roller coaster in a small dying town in the middle of nowhere, the former St. Cassian Chamber Choir.
It's just a ride. It's just a ride. And the world will keep on spinning with no ending or beginning. So just take a look around. Take a look around. Take a look around. And round and round and round.
Whether you seek the traditional modes or something fresh, it is clear that theater will continue to offer up a variety that ensures that there is something for everyone.